I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The room went silent before anyone dared to breathe. King Charles had faced scandals, family fractures, and public storms before, but this was different. This was not gossip, not ceremony, not another whispered palace embarrassment. This was legal paper, stamped and sealed, confirming that Catherine, not Camilla, not another senior royal, had inherited control of the royal trust estate. And in that instant, the monarchy's private order cracked open. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles took the sealed packet with both hands, but by the time he reached the second page, his grip had changed. The royal trust estate, a private legal structure holding protected royal assets, residences, archives, and ceremonial treasures, was no longer waiting for future instruction. It had moved. It had chosen its custodian. Catherine had inherited authority over the estate, and that meant she now held power over items and records that shaped not only family memory, but the monarchy's public identity. William stood close enough to see the sentence that struck his father hardest, yet the prince did not interrupt. He watched the king read the same line twice, then slowly lower the document to the table, as if the weight of the paper had become unbearable. The senior solicitor cleared his throat only once. He explained that the legal papers had been activated by an older trust clause, a hidden condition written to protect the estate if confidence in household control ever weakened. A trust clause is simply a binding instruction inside a legal agreement, and this one had remained buried so deeply that most of the palace had never heard its wording spoken aloud. Charles looked toward William, searching for outrage, denial, anything. But the future king gave him only restraint. He understood what this meant for Catherine. She had not been handed a gift. She had been placed inside a storm. The private secretary turned another page, and the silence tightened. One signature page was missing from the file copy, and that absence changed the room. It meant the final proof, the page showing exactly when the decision had been prepared, was somewhere else, held back or locked away. Charles pressed his fingertips against the table, unable to speak, while William's face hardened with quiet concern. Catherine had not even entered the room, yet her name had already divided it. Camilla had not yet been told, and that made the next silence more dangerous than the first. But while Charles sat frozen over the papers, the woman most threatened by Catherine's inheritance was about to hear the news behind a closed door. This was not just about land, jewels, papers, or privilege. It was about who the monarchy trusted, when everything fragile had to be protected. Charles saw a wife wounded by exclusion. William saw a future, protected by Catherine's steadiness. Camilla saw a door closing in front of her. And Catherine, suddenly placed at the center of it all, understood that inheritance could feel less like victory and more like a burden. Charles knew the decision had trapped him between love and law. The king wanted to shield Camilla from humiliation, but the legal papers had already made their demand, and ignoring them would place the entire royal trust estate at risk. That estate was more than property. It was the protected collection of royal residences, private archives, heirlooms, and ceremonial holdings that carried the family's memory into the future. Catherine had become its custodian, meaning the person legally responsible for guarding those assets, not simply enjoying them. And that truth changed the weight of her name in every room. Camilla heard the news in a private sitting room, and for a moment, she did not rise. The queen consort gripped the arm of her chair, as if stillness could stop the words from becoming real. She had lived through cold glances, public doubt, and years of proving her place, but this struck deeper. It told her there was a limit to how far trust would follow her. Charles stood near the door, unable to soften what the papers had said, and the monarch looked like a husband who had arrived too late to protect his wife from the one wound he could not dismiss. William found Catherine later and spoke with care. The prince asked whether she truly wanted to carry a trust that could divide the family even further, because he knew this was not a crown placed gently on her head. It was pressure. It was scrutiny. It was history watching her hands. Catherine admitted she was shaken, not triumphant, because every archive, residence, and heirloom now tied her choices to the monarchy's future image. Success had arrived dressed as duty, and duty had arrived with pain. The papers cut deepest with 3 words: stability, continuity, and future custodianship. Charles read them as a warning. Camilla heard them as rejection. William understood them as protection. Catherine felt them as a burden she had never asked to receive. But those words had not appeared by accident, and to understand why they were written into the trust, the story must return to the private incident everyone tried to bury. Every royal crisis has a moment that seems small when it happens, then enormous when history turns back to examine it. For this inheritance, that moment came during the private Windsor custodianship ceremony, when Catherine quietly stepped forward after a dispute over the estate archives. What looked like a minor family disagreement became the trigger that reshaped the trust, exposed old doubts, and sealed a future no one expected. Catherine did not raise her voice that day. She stood before family advisors, while Camilla questioned why she had been granted access to a restricted archive room tied to the royal trust estate. The Windsor custodianship ceremony was a private family process meant to decide who would help preserve royal records and ceremonial property for the next reign. Custodianship simply meant trusted responsibility, not ownership, and that distinction mattered because the estate carried more than valuables. It carried letters, heirlooms, rooms, and records that could shape how future generations understood the crown. Camilla pressed the issue with controlled force. The queen consort asked why Catherine should enter a room that even some senior household figures could not open without permission. Catherine felt every face turn toward her, but she refused to answer anger with anger. She said only that preservation required calm hands, clear limits, and loyalty to the future, rather than personal pride. Charles shifted in his chair when she said it. The king understood, in that instant, that this was no longer about one archive door. It had become a test of judgment. William watched Catherine absorb the pressure without striking back. The prince saw what others in the room could not ignore. She had been challenged, and still she protected the dignity of the moment. Camilla believed she was defending rank, but the challenge exposed something more dangerous. It showed the trustees that personal power could collide with the estate's long-term safety. And that was when one senior trustee made a documented account of Catherine's response, recording her restraint as proof that she could one day hold future custodial authority. The trust clause moved quietly after that. A trust clause is a binding instruction inside legal papers, and this one stated that if confidence in household control weakened, legal succession could pass to the figure judged most stable for the estate's future. Catherine's name was entered because of that ceremony. Camilla did not know it then. Charles suspected the moment had consequences, but even he did not see how far they would reach. And when Camilla learned that her own challenge had helped place Catherine above her, the palace moved from silence into confrontation. The confrontation did not happen in a grand hall or before a crowd. It happened in a private room, where every word landed harder, because there was nowhere to hide. Camilla entered wounded and furious. Catherine stood composed, but not untouched. Between them sat the legal folder, silent and unforgiving, turning years of politeness into one sharp question: who had truly earned the monarchy's trust? Camilla closed the door herself before speaking. No aides remained, no advisors waited nearby, and no friendly voice could soften what followed. The queen consort stared at Catherine and demanded a simple answer. Why had the family chosen her? Catherine answered quietly that she had never asked for the inheritance and had learned its full legal scope only when the sealed papers were delivered. The legal folder contained the formal trust confirmation, meaning the official document that activated the inheritance, and neither woman could pretend it no longer existed. The silence between them carried more weight than any raised voice. Camilla stepped closer, unable to hide the hurt beneath her anger. She accused Catherine of becoming the face of a future that no longer seemed to include her. The Princess of Wales shook her head and admitted the responsibility frightened her, because every decision would affect family relationships, the monarchy's legacy, and the public trust built over generations. She said this was never a victory in her eyes. It felt like standing beneath expectations that could never truly be escaped. Camilla searched her face for triumph, but found only exhaustion, and that only deepened the pain. The queen consort lowered her voice and revealed what had been haunting her since reading the papers. She believed Charles had known about the hidden clause far earlier than he admitted. Catherine did not answer immediately, and that silence convinced her that William might also have understood more than he ever revealed. The accusation hung between them like an unanswered challenge. Later, in a fictional recorded conversation preserved by the palace archivist, Catherine explained that she stayed silent because denying suspicions without proof would only deepen the family's wounds. Camilla suddenly pushed the legal folder across the table. The sharp movement broke the last trace of restraint. She demanded that Catherine renounce the estate authority before the family fractured beyond repair. Catherine steadied the folder with one hand, but refused. She insisted the decision did not belong to her alone, because the trustees, not personal wishes, held the legal power behind the inheritance. Her refusal was calm, yet absolute. But Catherine's refusal was not defiance for its own sake. Because behind the papers stood a legal machinery even Charles could not simply command. For the first time, Charles discovered that being king did not mean every door opened when he touched the handle. The trustees did not raise their voices. They did not flatter him. They simply placed the clauses before him and explained that the royal trust estate was bound by terms older than the present crisis. The crown could influence many things, but this decision had already moved beyond personal preference. Charles removed his glasses and set them beside the folder. The king looked at the elderly solicitor across the table and asked whether his own judgment had been overruled inside his own family's estate. The solicitor did not enjoy the answer. His voice stayed gentle, but his hands tightened around the papers as he explained that the royal trust estate was controlled by trustees, meaning appointed guardians legally required to protect the estate according to written rules, not royal emotion. Once the inheritance clause had been triggered, Catherine's position became legal, active, and protected from household pressure. Charles leaned back, wounded by the calmness of it all. He could face anger, he could answer accusation, but this quiet certainty left him nowhere to stand. The confirmation papers said Catherine's authority could not be paused simply because Camilla felt humiliated, or because the monarch wanted more time. That mattered because the estate held private archives, ceremonial residences, and heirloom collections tied to the future image of the crown. If the king challenged the papers, he would not only question Catherine, he would expose the very doubts that caused the trust to move toward her in the first place. The elderly solicitor lowered his eyes before revealing the next blow through a documented account attached to the trust record. The notes praised Catherine's discretion during earlier family disputes, especially moments when she had protected sensitive material from becoming personal ammunition. Charles read the passage once, and then looked away. The monarch understood why those words had power. Catherine had been measured not by rank, but by restraint. Camilla had been wounded not by insult, but by comparison, and the comparison could not be unseen. The solicitor then placed one final warning before him. Any attempt to reverse the decision would force a formal review, and a formal review would drag private family conflict into recorded legal scrutiny. Charles pressed one hand against the table, caught between defending the queen consort's pride and protecting the monarchy from a scandal far larger than inheritance. He wanted to fight for Camilla, but every route led back to Catherine's name, fixed in ink and shielded by law. And while Charles wrestled with that impossible choice, the first consequences began moving through the palace like a cold draft under locked doors. The fallout did not begin with shouting. It began with silence. Doors closed earlier than usual. Staff lowered their voices. Invitations were delayed. The palace did what palaces always do in crisis. It rearranged itself before the public understood anything had happened. But behind that polished quiet, Camilla felt stripped of influence. Catherine felt watched. William grew protective, and Charles stood between them all, unable to restore what had been broken. Catherine felt the change before anyone explained it. A senior aide placed the first estate acknowledgement before her, and her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. The acknowledgement was a formal paper confirming she accepted responsibility for decisions tied to the royal trust estate, including briefings, archives, ceremonial inventories, and protected residences. That mattered because these were not ordinary household duties. They shaped who could access private royal history, who could approve heirloom movements, and who could protect objects that carried the family's memory into the next reign. Camilla felt the loss in one sentence. A staff member entered quietly and told the queen consort that the next trust meeting would proceed without her approval. She did not answer. She sat alone, fingers still against the chair, hearing the meaning beneath the message. Influence had not been taken from her loudly. It had been removed through process, one protocol at a time. Charles heard about the exchange soon after, and the king understood why it wounded her. The monarchy had not rejected Camilla in public, but inside the palace, the balance had shifted. William watched Catherine sign the paper, and saw how hard she fought to steady herself. The prince knew she had gained authority, but he also knew authority could become a cage. Every household department was now adjusting around her, changing access lists, delaying old requests, and sending new approvals through her office. Catherine did not smile. She read every line carefully, because one mistake could be twisted into ambition, and one refusal could be called cruelty. Success had arrived, but it felt like exposure. The deeper shock came when one senior aide found a locked appendix attached to the file. The appendix was a sealed section of legal papers, used to protect sensitive instructions from wider circulation. And this one named specific assets Catherine had to guard from personal claim or symbolic misuse. That phrase changed everything. Several heirloom transfer requests from previous months now had to be reviewed again, and Camilla's name sat near more than one disputed item. William realized Catherine could not face the pressure alone, so before the crisis could harden into a permanent family war, William asked his father for one private conversation that no courtier could control. When William entered the room, he did not come as the future king first. He came as a husband, a son, and a man tired of watching duty wound everyone it touched. Charles looked older than he had that morning. The legal papers were still on the desk, but for once, neither man reached for them. This was no longer only about Catherine's inheritance. It was about whether the family could survive the truth. William closed the door and stood in silence before he spoke. No aides remained. No lawyers waited with prepared language. No Camilla, no Catherine. No one to soften the pain. The prince told Charles that Catherine would honor the trust, but she could not become a weapon against the queen consort. The trust meant a legal duty to protect estate assets, private archives, and ceremonial holdings. And that duty mattered because the monarchy's future image now rested partly in Catherine's hands. But William knew something else mattered too. If the family turned this into punishment, the inheritance would poison everyone it touched. Charles looked down at the papers, and finally let the sadness show. The king admitted he felt he had failed Camilla as a husband, and Catherine as a sovereign's future. He had wanted to protect his wife from humiliation, yet he had also watched the Princess of Wales carry a burden she never chased. William did not attack Camilla. He chose each word carefully, telling his father that defending Catherine did not require destroying the queen consort. The future king understood that one woman felt rejected while the other felt trapped, and both wounds were now inside the same room. Charles asked whether accepting the decision would make him look weak. William answered that fighting it would make the monarchy look afraid of its own safeguards. The papers could be challenged, but every challenge would expose the private doubts, old disputes, and hidden clauses that led to Catherine's appointment. The king heard the truth in that. Resistance would not save anyone. It would only drag Camilla deeper into public pain and force Catherine to defend a duty she had not begged to receive. Charles reached for the folder at last. Not to fight it, but to close it. He decided to recognize Catherine's custodianship privately, before the household split beyond repair. William watched his father make the choice, and knew the family had not healed, but it had stepped back from the edge. Still, the silence could not hold forever. But the palace could not contain a decision this large forever. And by morning, the country woke to a headline that turned a private inheritance into a national reckoning. By sunrise, the story had escaped palace walls. What began as sealed legal confirmation became the image of a monarchy rearranging itself in real time. The public did not see the quiet rooms, the trembling signature, or Charles setting down his glasses in defeat. They saw one simple fact printed in heavy black letters. Catherine had inherited the royal trust estate, and the balance of royal power had changed. The headline hit like thunder. A major Sunday front page carried the words, "Catherine takes the trust," beside a formal image of the Princess of Wales, and by mid-morning, the phrase was everywhere. The royal trust estate meant the protected body of private royal assets, archives, ceremonial holdings, and residences, and that mattered because whoever guarded it helped shape how the monarchy remembered itself and presented its future. Catherine's name on that trust did not sound like a small legal change. It sounded like a signal. Power was moving toward the next generation, and everyone could feel it. A small crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace, quiet at first, then restless with phones raised and voices low. Some came because they admired Catherine. Others came because they sensed something deeper had shifted behind the gates. Broadcasters framed it as a rare transfer of private royal authority, not a public title, but a powerful sign of confidence. The Princess of Wales had not spoken, yet her silence became part of the story. Catherine was being watched as if one document had turned her from future queen into present guardian. Charles watched the broadcast for less than a minute. The king heard one commentator ask why Catherine had been chosen over more senior figures, and he turned the television off before Camilla entered. That single gesture said what no palace statement could. He knew the question would wound the queen consort. He knew it would follow her through every corridor. Camilla stepped into the room moments later, and although she said nothing, the monarch understood that the outside world had now joined the private crisis. The official statement arrived in polished language. It confirmed Catherine's custodial role, while avoiding any mention of family conflict, Camilla's disappointment, or the hidden disputes that had brought the trust clause to life. But the careful wording only sharpened public suspense. People did not need every detail to understand the verdict. The monarchy had trusted Catherine with something sacred. Charles could no longer keep the pain inside palace walls, and when the doors closed again, the public noise faded, leaving the family to face what the papers had truly decided. In the end, the legal papers did more than transfer an estate. They exposed the difference between possession and trust. Charles had been stunned because the decision reached beyond his wishes. Camilla had been wounded because it confirmed a limit she could not cross. William had been tested because protecting Catherine meant protecting the future, and Catherine, standing at the center, proved that power can arrive quietly and still change everything. Charles called the private family meeting himself. The king did not arrive with anger this time, and he did not reach for delay. Catherine stood before him with William close beside her, while Camilla remained still enough to make the silence feel fragile. The royal trust estate meant the protected body of royal residences, private archives, ceremonial holdings, and heirlooms. And Catherine's custodianship meant she was legally responsible for guarding them. That mattered because the estate did not simply hold valuable things. It held memory, duty, reputation, and the fragile story the monarchy would carry into the next reign. Charles looked at Catherine and gave the words everyone had been waiting for. He formally accepted her inheritance. The king told her the role was not a reward, not a victory, and not a weapon against anyone in the family. It was a responsibility she had already earned through restraint, loyalty, and calm judgment when others had let pain speak first. Catherine listened without triumph. William watched her carefully, knowing the Princess of Wales had gained authority but also inherited pressure that would follow her into every future decision. Camilla did not celebrate. The queen consort could not pretend the decision had not wounded her, but she understood at last that it would not be reversed. Charles saw that understanding in her face, and the monarch knew acceptance was not the same as peace. Still, it was enough to stop the crisis from becoming ruin. The trustees remained behind Catherine's authority. William remained beside her, and the household began adjusting permanently around the new truth. Catherine's inheritance marked a shift the family could no longer deny. Personal entitlement had met trusted stewardship, and stewardship had won. The monarchy survived this moment not because everyone walked away satisfied, but because one painful decision forced it to choose stability over pride. There was nothing left to overturn. The papers had spoken, Charles had accepted them, and Catherine walked forward carrying the estate not as a prize, but as a solemn promise to the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.